Hello and welcome to today's seminar, Surviving Separation. My name is Giles Henman and I'm the Senior Partner and Head of Business of H Wealth International here in Singapore. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by an expert panel of speakers, Alexis Livanes, Partner of H Wealth International, Neil Jensen, a Specialist Mortgage Partner for H Mortgage International, and Sarah-Mae Thomas, Managing Director of Sarah-Mae Thomas LLC, a dual qualified family lawyer based here in Singapore. Considering or experiencing separation can, of course, be a very difficult and complicated time. There are many factors that will influence the decisions you make, and today we would like to share with you some of the important considerations you should be aware of as you begin that journey. Whether you're the driver or the passenger in this process, it is important to understand your unique position and the options that are available to you. So today, our expert panel will cover topics such as where to file for divorce, pension considerations, assets such as homes and future mortgages, and of course, children. Please post any questions you may have in the Q&A box, which can be done anonymously. And if you would like further advice about your unique situation, we'd be more than happy to hold a one-to-one session at your own convenience. So, assessing your position, where your assets sit, and understanding what your priorities are is the best place to begin this journey. To share her insights with us, I would like to invite Alexis, a financial wellness accredited partner at H Wealth International, to say a few words. Alexis, can I pass over to you, please?
Thanks, Giles. So assessing your position is a really important stage that unfortunately a lot of people do actually miss out. So we would encourage you that if you are thinking about divorcing, separating, take the time to consult a financial planner. Worryingly, only 3% of divorcees in the UK have actually sought financial advice, which is quite concerning actually, bearing in mind that 1 in 4 people, when they do actually divorce, are over 50. So at a really crucial stage in their life. So what's in this stage, what you can start to do is actually think about your household finances. Have a look and see, what bank accounts you've got, any investments, retirement planning, and really start to research what your financial position is. And what this does is actually empower you to make some really important financial decisions before you actually go into divorce. So that's what I would definitely recommend in this stage.
Thanks, Alexis. So what would you say to the listeners are the first steps that they should be taking in this process?
Yeah, I think it's really getting closer to your own personal finances, but also your household finances. So whether you're working or not working, what are your day-to-day expenses? So really keep a budget over a couple of months if you've got that luxury, or a couple of weeks. So what are your own expenses? If you've got children, what expenses are associated with the kids, school fees, school camps, all the other expenses that come with kids. And then that will really start to, if you do it over a certain period of time, that will really start to give you a pattern of the income that you will need coming in, and then also an idea of the expenses. Again, like I said, actually, if a lot of the investments or savings may not be in your name, and that's okay. Just try and find out and have the transparency again within your household as to what investments, what cash savings you've got. Really important, in your own name, what does your credit score look like? Because here in Singapore, if potentially you haven't been working, you may not have a bank account in your name. So then post-divorce, what does it look like for you? So make sure you're across your credit score. Can you open up something in your own name to get some sort of history? So that's what I'd recommend. Really take stock of where you are at the moment.
That's great advice, thank you. And we were talking about something the other day, and it's a question I'd like to pose to you. Why are women who are financially prepared, they always seem to be better off? What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, and it's about being in a position to make a confident decision, knowing what's driving that decision, and that actually empowers you to make the decision not only for now but actually for your future. So if you have done the pre-homework, I guess, and understanding what you need, you go into your divorce proceedings with an element of empowerment. You can make more positive negotiations, and actually you can make use of the assets that you have in your household currently. How are you going to use that in the future, and is it in your best interest? And look, it may not be that the financial outcome is more, but just that you will actually have a positive emotion post-divorce, I think, is really crucial.
Thanks, Alexis. If it's okay, I'll come back to you later with some further questions. And now it's your turn, Sarah-Mae, to talk, have a few words and use your experience working with clients who are considering separation. And before I do that, and just speaking to the audience, in case you think you're alone currently, the statistics suggest something very different. There were actually 7,890 marital disillusions in 2021 in Singapore alone, an increase of 13.4% from 2020. May well be a hangover from COVID. And the median age of divorce rose over the last decade from 41.3 in 2011 to 43.9 in 2021, and from 37.7 years to 40 for female divorcees. So with those statistics in mind, Sarah-Mae, talking about the basics for listeners based here in Singapore, where should they look to file, and what are some of the legalities that they should consider?
Yeah. So file in Singapore. Well, it really, I always say this, get the big picture advice, because if you've got, Swiss assets, you've got, say you've got property in Mexico and some in Singapore, if you speak to different lawyers in that country, they will usually tell you, oh, get divorced in this country because of course it's going to be beneficial to them. But the question is it going to be beneficial to you? So, for example, if you've got assets in those different countries, what is the law on the division of assets in that country? And will it affect the overall division when it comes to you? So, for example, in Singapore, the court will only look at a matrimonial asset acquired within the course of the marriage. Places like the UK actually allow you to claim something that's outside the scope of Singapore law. So in the case of, we call it a Part 3 application, where after you get a Singapore divorce, if you have been disadvantaged in this application in Singapore, maybe because you didn't have legal representation or there was no matrimonial asset to divide, you can actually take out an application in the UK to get financial relief. So knowing your rights, what kind of rights do you have and how is it going to affect your division? The laws are very clear in Singapore about division and very clear about custody. So if you've got children and you want sole custody, it's going to be a very uphill battle to get sole custody in Singapore. And that is the case usually in the UK and Australia, but different countries have different laws. So get big picture advice is what I always say, so that you're not on the back foot, you're not kind of responding to applications and then contesting jurisdictions. You're actually coming in with all the information and then making an informed decision. And the other thing is you might need to get financial relief in other countries, like in the UK, I think some English pension companies will not recognize a foreign order. So you would need to get an application for financial relief in the UK. So get advice. How is the law of the land going to affect your matrimonial dispute? And then make a decision. Now, when it comes to legalities in the country, expats have to meet one of two thresholds. So are you domiciled in Singapore? And if you're a PR or a Singaporean, you're immediately deemed to be domiciled in Singapore. But if you're an expat, you need to have been in Singapore for 3 years, 3 continuous years. So the court will look at, if you've spent 3 years, maybe 2 years in Singapore and then gone to Bali for a year and then come back, that's going to be something that you need to look at, because the court will look at long absences from Singapore as breaking up that 3 years. So it might be that you have jurisdiction or you don't have jurisdiction in Singapore. And jurisdiction actually just means, does the court in Singapore have a right to hear your case? So in terms of legality, something that's very important in Singapore, it's a two-step process. So divorce is always going to be, how do we dissolve the marriage? Is it going to be on adultery, unreasonable behavior? Is it going to be on 3 or 4 year separation, and then desertion? Desertion is when someone just walks out and doesn't come back up to 2 years. So that's step 1. And then step 2 is going to be, how do we divide the surplus wealth in the marriage? How do we look at maintenance for children? That's when things that, like Alexis talked about, having your finances in play. What are your expenses for your children? Look at your household expenses and have the receipts, have the documentation, so that if the other party kind of contests your position, at least you've got documentary proof for your position. And then, of course, you're looking at custody, care, control. Custody is when you can make major life decisions for the child, and it's going to be joint in the case of custody, unless there's exceptional circumstances like domestic abuse, physical violence, that kind of thing. And you're going to want to look at relocation, division of assets, and maintenance for a child is payable until the child turns 21. So that's kind of a nutshell of a divorce here in Singapore.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, some great insights. So I'd like to move on to Neil, please. So as I mentioned earlier, as a specialist property and mortgage member of our team working for 8 Mortgage International. Neil, when our listeners are assessing their position, what are the considerations that they must think about around their homes and property investments generally?
Thanks, Giles. So the things that I would look at, first and foremost, if we look at the subject headings: ownership, who owns the properties, the type of properties, is it a home, or, you know, if you live overseas, you may well have acquired a few buy-to-let properties. Is the finance on the property? And then we start moving into tax implications that could occur, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. And also, are you married, or are you just in a relationship, and so you're not going to be divorcing, you're just separating in terms of that relationship, and how you would treat that would be done differently. So if we go to ownership first, who owns the properties? So are they in joint names? How do you own them? So you can own a property in 2 ways in the UK. It can be joint tenants or tenants in common. So joint tenant would be that you own it with your husband or wife 50-50, and you have equal ownerships. Tenants in common, you can actually change the percentage of ownership. You can have an 80-20 split. You can do it any way that you want. You then look at the type of property. Is it rental or is it a home? Because you start to think about, well, where am I going to live? Am I going back? You have certain relationships where one partner or spouse may live overseas still, and the other one goes back. Where are you going to live? And then if one partner or spouse owns the property in their own name, and you're the person that doesn't own that property, what protection have you got? So there are things like home rights that you can apply for as you're going through the process, where you can actually apply to the land registry to stop the other partner or spouse that owns the property actually selling it before the procedure goes through. So there are numerous things that you can do to protect yourself. The one area that I'll talk about now is mortgages, because that is a massive concern to people, that how am I going to be able to take on the mortgage? And I always say to people, look, speak to the bank, because obviously they have a vested interest. They have first legal charge over the property. But always when you go into that conversation, understand that the solutions that the bank give you are only the ones that the bank can give you. I'm a mortgage broker. I deal with the entire market. We've got access to anything that's available. So I always say to people, speak to a mortgage broker as well, because the broker can give you a much wider picture of the market. A bank might know that there's another lender that can actually help you to sort this out, but it's beyond their remit, it's beyond their job's worth, really, to actually recommend that. Therefore, they are limited within their own powers. Therefore, it often makes sense to go and seek some financial advice, because actually the solution might not lay where the mortgage is at the moment. It actually might be somewhere else.
Thank you, Neil. That's brilliant. So the next phase we want to move on to now is the taking action stage. So you've assessed your position, collated everything you will need to move forward with confidence. So Alexis, how would you advise your clients on the next steps?
Thanks, Charles. So this stage, I think, is the actual reality of divorce. You know, it's crunch time. We've done the research, we've done the preparation. Hopefully in your preparation, you've built up what we would call an emergency fund, which is essentially 6 months worth of expenditure in instant access cash. So you've got that as a great foundation to take you through the next couple of months. What's really important in this stage is to understand that actually your household property, whether it be an investment property or your owner occupied property, it may not be actually your biggest asset in your household. And what I want people to start thinking about is actually your retirement accounts, whether it be superannuation from Australia, UK pension, CPF, SRS, that actually is probably going to be the biggest asset in your household. So let's start thinking about that. How does that factor into your divorce negotiations? And it's not just about your own retirement, it's about your ex-partners. And if you haven't been working, that's even more important. And what I find is that a lot of women actually, they really do shy away from talking about their partner's retirement accounts because it feels just going a bit too far. Well, actually it's not, because the statistics show that women still retire in poverty in this day and age. So it's about, taking action, understanding what that whole retirement piece looks like, having the conversation, going into the negotiations well equipped, thinking about your will. If you don't have one, certainly get one, update your beneficiaries, think about your life insurance, and really just start thinking about what your employment options are, if that factors into your future planning. What does that start to look like? So that's what I would recommend in this stage.
Yeah, once again, thank you, Alexis. With that, or staying with that theme and moving to Sarah, we work with many expats. Their situation is really simple. It's often complex, with assets in different jurisdictions around the world, different asset classes. How would you advise them to go about identifying where actually those assets are and what they are?
Good question. So as a family lawyer, my goal is to make sure that divorce is as quick and pain-free as possible. But the danger when we negotiate what we call a fast track or uncontested divorce is that a quick settlement usually might disadvantage the spouse that's the homemaker and not financially aware. They don't have visibility. So legally, until affidavits are filed in court, you can actually be negotiating in kind of silo, like in a vacuum, and your spouse might not actually be disclosing, because they're not mandated by law, the relevant asset pool. And it might just be 50% of the asset pool. So what you're going to need to think about is what assets, if you're divorcing in Singapore, are we looking at? So assets bought during the course of the marriage, before the course of the marriage, but improved upon. So say you've got a London property that your ex-spouse has acquired from his parents. And then you've taken this London property, you've renovated it, you've lived in it like a matrimonial home. It then becomes what we would call a matrimonial asset. And there are arguments to be made for how you've improved upon the value of the home. So inheritance money, it's usually ring fence, premarital assets, ring fence, which means that it does not go into the pool, which means that it's not subject to division. So think about the categories of assets. And if you are not sure, I would say if you feel like there is more assets than you kind of have visibility about, speak to financial planners, sometimes we get in forensic accountants because we need to do tracing of assets. So what would happen in a divorce case is the court will say, right, so we've got all these assets. What happened before these assets were acquired? So looking at a tracing expedition, where did the monies go? And what tends to happen when someone's contemplating divorce is that one spouse decides that they want to be smart and kind of whittle money overseas, open companies, dissipate is what we call it, dissipate the financial asset pool, which means that there's very little to divide. So in those cases, I would highly recommend going through what we call a discovery application, which means that we ask those questions, ask where did this money go? And then we go through a tracing expedition, which is very important, especially when it comes to final division, because if the court feels that, yeah, this person has actually dissipated monies or used monies for maybe girlfriends or boyfriends, and that these are matrimonial assets, there can be an adverse inference on this person or an add back. So if the court says, yeah, 100,000 was actually dissipated, we're going to add it back to the pool, and the person who has dissipated will get less. That's very important when it comes to kind of having visibility over your finances.
Thank you. And staying with you for now, probably the most sensitive element when separating from a partner. This can often lead to relocation for some or all of the family. Can you perhaps run through some of the considerations around taking children in and out of the country?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So as an expat, you have to think about whether Singapore is going to be your home until all your children turn 21. So when you negotiate a divorce agreement, you should have a provision for a relocation clause. So that this gives whoever has that decision-making power to relocate to the country of their choice. If it's going to be a joint decision, it has to be put in your divorce agreement, because under the Women's Charter, nobody can take and relocate children out of Singapore without the court's consent or the parents' consent. Otherwise, you'll have what is called a Hague Convention of Child Abduction application on your doorstep, which means that if the country has signed on to this Hague Convention, you will be faced with an application of abducting your child overseas. And this happens very often. I've seen many cases where maybe the spouse comes from another country and that they've moved maybe to a country like Australia or Switzerland, and then they've come to Singapore. So Singapore is like the third or fourth country. And when the marriage breaks down in Singapore, they don't feel comfortable in Singapore. They want to go back to their home country. They just take the kids and run. But what happens is that you will be faced with a Hague Convention application. And there are only two exceptions to this, is if there was like, a rightful cause, like maybe domestic violence or the children were in harm's way, then you can have a defense under this convention. But otherwise, always think of relocation and what the law says about relocation. It's very important to have what is called a relocation plan. So if your spouse doesn't agree with your relocation plan, you actually will have to convince the court why Singapore is not going to be the residence of choice for the child. And the court will look at, okay, so what is your support in your relocating country? What are the schools the kids are going to go to? What are the finances going to be like? And most importantly, what is the relationship with the left behind parent? How are you going to make sure that access is maintained for the child? And usually it's the father. But I've had many applications where the mom is the left behind as well. So it really depends on the dynamic of the family, but be prepared to answer these questions about relocation. When it comes to relocation, the courts will also look at what is called habitual residence. So the court will look at personal ties to a country of a child. And usually these subjective factors are an inquiry made to an older child. So if an older child is more mature and had kind of cultural affiliations with a certain country, the court will look at those things. But very young children, the court will look at what are the wishes of the parents and what was the agreement between parents as to the habitual residence. So those are some considerations when it comes to relocation and habitual residence.
Again, thank you, Sarah. Neil, can I loop back to you? You spoke earlier about how individuals should consider their existing property assets. What should they now be doing in this taking action phase?
Thanks, Giles. Well, I mean, front and center of everything here is someone like Sarah. When you've got property assets overseas, I strongly advise you to get legal representation. There are so many pitfalls, and I'll come onto those in a moment. But the first bit of advice I would say that if you are going to see a legal representative, don't go in and just pour your heart out because you're spending your own money. And I'm sure Sarah would actually agree with that. Go in and be as prepared as what you can. So for instance, if you have a family home, you have more than one property, the first bit of advice I would say is get it valued. Try and find out all of the facts before you go in to see the lawyer, because that is one of the first things that, you know, Sarah talks about discovery and all the rest of it. There's going to be a fact finding the same as a financial planner would do or anything else. So if you don't know how much your property's worth, you don't know how much is left on the mortgage, what the repayments are, you're wasting your own money, because if you get in the solicitor, the lawyer to do that, they're charging you for their time and you're going to rack up some bills quite quickly. So this is sort of front and center for the lawyer, but actually outside of that, you've got the financial planner, you've got the mortgage broker, that you really should be trying to do as much preparation in advance of going and sitting down when the meter's running. The biggest implication that people don't realize is that there is potentially stamp duty, land tax to pay in the UK. You are protected while you're within a marriage. If you're not married, then there are things that you would have to do. But ultimately, if you are taking a property that is in joint names and you're moving it into single name, it's a transfer of asset. And therefore, if it's not done properly, you will potentially get hit with stamp duty, land tax, and it can be very, very expensive.
Great advice, that Neil. I now want to move into the post-divorce stage, and again, maybe bring you back in, Alexis. So looking forward to what people might experience once the divorce has been finalised, how should they focus on what effectively is a new future for them?
Yeah, so this is the new beginning stage. So I think we've got to acknowledge that all the way through it's an emotional process, but this in particular can affect people quite adversely. And I think it is this is what life is going to be. And hopefully the pre-assessment, the strong negotiations has helped you sort of come to terms of what this new beginning looks like. And it's also a period of excitement, but it's a chance to go, well, in my own right, you know, which of the assets post the negotiations, you know, what am I now looking after, whether it be the property or the retirement fund. There may be some retirement fund splitting, so therefore you're definitely going to need some financial planning around that. And you know, you then start to look at your own retirement. If you have got some retirement plan splitting, how is that going to complement and really accelerate where you want to get to? So it's a period of where you're adjusting to your new life, and it's how you're going to forge your own financial path as well, whatever that may look like, whether you're going back into employment or not. So it's taking stock really of where you are, I think, and feeling comfortable with that and empowered then to make some really great decisions for your own future and your kids if they're involved.
Great, thanks, Alexis. And I think from everything you and Neil have said, it's quite obvious that taking advice right from the beginning of the process all the way through to the end is just incredibly important. So you are in control of that process rather than somebody else. Again, moving back to you, Neil, from a post-divorce perspective, if it's an individual's ambition to purchase a new home, is there anything that you can share that our listeners should be aware of? And before you move on to that, Alexis mentioned an interesting statistic earlier that 1 in 4 people are over 50 when they divorce. So how might that affect them purchasing a new home with respect to loan terms and maintenance payments? I.e., can maintenance payments be considered when assessing how much an individual can borrow?
Yeah, it's a great question, Giles. And banks will. They obviously will want to know how long you are going to receive that. I think, as time's gone on, there was very much a period, wasn't there, where 65 was seen as this huge barrier, and then maybe 70. But it's felt that people are living a lot longer these days, and a lot of financial institutions, not all, but a lot, have recognized that people don't necessarily retire at 65 or 70, and they may well have got divorced in their 50s, and there's a necessity to work longer. Therefore, we've moved away from this, you have to finish the mortgage at 65, you have to finish it at 70. And again, a good mortgage broker would be able to sit down with you and say, well, how long are you going to have that maintenance for? And are you going to be working? And, well, can you work until you're 70? Is it your intention to work to 75? And if it is, then I'm pretty sure that there's a lender that will match your requirements and be able to do that. And I'm not going to say, oh, nobody wants to work till they're 75. My father-in-law's over 75 and still more than happy to be working, but it's not everybody's choice. But I think it's just this mental barrier that we have as we get to 50 or older, that, well, I won't get a mortgage once I'm 60, once I finish 65 or 70. It's not the case.
Brilliant. Well, that ends the overall presentation. We'd like to move to a Q&A section, please. We've got a number of questions come in so far, but we have a few more that we can make space for. Before I do that, I'd like to thank you, the panelists, Neil, Alexis and Sarah. There's been some great insights and advice there, which I'm sure the audience would have massively appreciated and got a massive amount of value from. So without further ado, I'll move on to the Q&A section. So if I can start actually with an initial question to you, Sarah. It's actually a couple of questions to you, Sarah. So initially, can a Singapore court make a decision on an overseas asset?
Yes, it can, but it's very hard when it comes to enforcement. So if the court has said that, for example, an Italian property will be sold, you'd have to take out enforcement action in Italy, for example, to enforce that. Otherwise, it becomes what we call an in personam order. So if the property in Italy is worth 150,000 euro, that would be the value that you can enforce in Singapore. So the short answer is yes.
Great, thank you. And cryptocurrency is the bane of my life, but it's a question on cryptocurrency, which is, does cryptocurrency count as a matrimonial asset? And I guess that is also a question around tracing such assets as well.
Yes, I've had a few cases with the cryptos. Yes, it does. So actually any asset class would be considered a matrimonial asset. But then of course, there'll be arguments because a lot of people have made losses with crypto. So usually what the courts have done in some of the cases is, well, it's all gone. So there's nothing to talk about. So yeah.
Great. And a question for you, Neil. For those people who are not listed on the mortgage, is there anything that they can do to protect themselves?
Yeah, this comes back to if you're in Singapore or Hong Kong, wherever, Giles, and you're moving back to the UK and you have a concern that your name is not on the property, provided your partner or spouse is the only owner, so if they own it with their mother or future partner, whatever, then that's more difficult. But you can apply to the land registry for something called home rights, and that protects you throughout the divorce or separation period, and it stops them selling the property while you still require a home, and actually can continue into the divorce if the financial settlement has not been fully agreed. So in simple terms, you can't get turfed out onto the street. There are legal ways that you can protect yourself by actually putting a registering with the land registry to actually stop that happening. They could agree a sale, but it'll get to the point of the land registry and they'll turn around and say no. this is actually protected. You can't go through with this transaction.
Great, thank you. I think that is all for the questions. I'm assuming that's because the panelists were so comprehensive in terms of their overview of the various stages of separation. I'd like to close by just thanking everybody for joining today. Please do get in touch if you'd like any further information on any of the areas covered. We'll, of course, be very happy to help and understand that this can be a very difficult time for all involved, and any inquiry that you make would be held in complete confidence, as you would expect. So all the best, and we hope to see you soon. We hope to support you in any way that we can in the future, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.